Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Chris and I'm in the middle of a big basement remodel. And in this video, I'm gonna be tearing out the old, dingy, and dated basement. We're gonna be putting up a steel frame, drywalling, putting a nice coat of paint. We're gonna be using some cool new tools that I haven't used before that make certain processes really nice and fast and easy. We already did this egress window down here. There's a great video on that. And in the final video of this series, I'm gonna be showing how to install a really easy to put down carpet and ceiling tile to finish off this space. So without further ado, let's get tearing down this old basement. The first thing we do is clean up as much as we can and then move all the furniture to one side of the basement so we can rip up the carpet. And you can see what that previous window looks like in the corner and how little light it lets in. Then we tear out the old drop ceiling and remove the previous walls. And these walls were a weird soundproof system that the previous owner put in, and I just really didn't like the look and the effect they had on deadening sound. Plus I wanted to remove that partition wall and really open up the space. And before I get too far along, I want to give a big thanks to Lowe's for sponsoring this video and being such a great partner to this channel. They help me create videos like this that hopefully will help some of you accomplish some of your home projects. Now that I have a fresh slate, I can start framing. I'm going to use steel frames down here for a couple reasons. They're really light, they're as cheap as wood, they're dead straight, and pretty easy to work with. I start by making a line that is 3/4 inch wider than the studs that I'm using. That way if there's any bow in my basement foundation, I'll have enough wiggle room to still make my wall nice and straight. Alright, whether you're using steel or wood, you're going to need either Tapcon concrete screws or a ram set to fasten that bottom plate to the concrete floor. Now with steel, I'd have to use a different bit to drill through the steel first and then into the concrete, kind of a pain in the butt. So I'm going to use a ram set, plus these are a lot more fun. They take a 22 blank cartridge and shoot aluminum nails into the concrete floor below. They're a lot of fun, but you need to make sure you have hearing protection on, as it's basically a gunshot. To properly load a ram set, you load the nail into the barrel first, then add the blank. That way you don't risk the tool firing while you're loading the nail. They also make ram sets that are automatic that you don't have to load one at a time, and I'll have a link to this tool as well as all the other tools that I use for this project down in the description. Once I have that corner secure, I'll lay out the rest of my bottom plate, and the cool thing about steel is that it's really easy to splice together. And here you can see that 3/4 inch gap that I left between the frame and the foundation. Now to cut steel studs, you can do a couple different things. You can use a pair of tin snips, which I'm going to show you right here, and then also a metal chop saw. Now all my studs on this wall are all the same height, so I'm going to go over a little bit later and use the chop saw to make it a lot quicker. Another thing to keep in mind when cutting metal studs is there are tops and bottoms to these. You can see along this metal stud, there's 2 openings for wires on the bottom side and one at the top. Another easy way to remember is it almost looks like a silhouette of a person. The head goes up, and you want to measure and cut from the same side each time. So I'm going to measure from the bottom to the top on all my pieces. We're 94 1/16. If you have access to a metal chop saw, it'll make cutting these a lot quicker, and you can do multiples at once. I set up a stop block. Make sure all my pieces are lined up. Clamp it down. You see, that's a lot quicker than cutting them all by hand with tin snips. Okay, to lay out the top plate, I drop my stud into the bottom plate. I hold a level next to the stud until I'm nice and level. And then I'll make a mark at the top plate or on the joist, and that's where I know where my top plate needs to rest. So I'll put my chalk line there, do the same thing on the other side, strike a line, and that's where I know where to put my top plate. Now, since I'm screwing into wood, I don't need to use ram sets. I just use self-tapping sheet metal screws and screw that top plate into the bottom of the joist. Now that I have my first stud laid out where I want, I can screw it into place on the bottom. Then I'll take my level and make sure it's nice and square and plumb, screw it to the top, and then now that this first stud is nice and level, I can mark out with my tape measure 16 on center along the top and the bottom and go through and run this entire wall. I'll be using small 1/2 inch self-tapping screws to secure the frame together. Once I'm done framing, I can add these plastic little grommets that are made specifically for steel studs. Then I can safely run my wire and place my outlets. So what we did on this wall, because we have some obstacles, is we're again starting in the corner with our sheet of drywall that's going to be going 16 on center. Start here, have my next 16, my next 16, and then we have a window casing here. The stud for the window casing is going to go flush with the inside of this window case so that I can screw trim board or drywall to that. And then you add a top plate to the bottom and top of the window casing. So again, you can trim out that window and you just continue your 16 on center all the way across. And here's my last 16 on center before that window casing starts again. So I'm going to add another stud when that happens. You don't want to skip this stud because you still want everything 16 on center in case that's where a seam is, and that way you can find the studs in the wall. Then my next one is over here for 16, but I'm dropping my ceiling down, so I had to add another stud. So if you run into obstacles, it's not a problem. You just keep your 16 on center and then you add studs as needed and your top plates and bottom plates to frame those cases out. Our next step is to put in some insulation and then hang drywall. Now there's a lot of different opinions out there when it comes to insulation, vapor barriers, and all that stuff when it comes to basements. But for my basement, my climate, my home location, I don't want or need anything more than that single layer of insulation that I put in. I would recommend talking to an inspector and asking what code is in your area and what is recommended for your specific home and climate to suit what's best for you and your situation. Down here below grade, we're going to use a mold defense drywall and run the sheets horizontally. Just like with bricks, you want to stagger the seams, which will make hiding the seams after mudding much easier. Now you can use a regular drill and driver for screwing in drywall sheets, but ideally you'd want to use a drywall gun like what we have here. It does a couple of unique things that a regular drill just doesn't do. First, it has a stationary collar over the bit that only lets the screw get driven in so deep so that you get the perfect depth on every screw. The gun also has a clutch system in it so that you can pull the trigger and get the motor spooled up, but the screw won't turn until you push the screw into the drywall, then it'll engage that clutch. This is a really nice feature and why drywall guns work so much better. There's a link to those down in the description. You want to add a thin layer of mud over all the screw holes, and because they were all countersunk properly with that drywall gun, the mud will make those holes disappear after paint. Then you lay down a layer of mud along each of the seams and run paper drywall tape over top of the mud. Then you'll go back over the seam with pressure on a mudding knife to flatten out that paper and remove excess mud. Then after the first coat of mud dries, you add another coat to the seams using a wider 10 to 12 inch knife, and you'll create a big wide feathered area of mud that ends up making those seams invisible after paint as well. It's best to do at least 2 of these widening skim coats. After the last coat dries, you want to go over everything with a sanding sponge to smooth it out and knock down any high spots. If you find any areas that you miss, just go over it one more time with some more mud and then sand it down before you paint. Now on to painting. This is typically something I dread, but I was really excited to do on this project because I just picked up this paint sprayer at Lowe's. I've always hated cutting in and rolling paint, and I've always thought these sprayers were really complicated to use with a lot of room for air, and I was a little too intimidated to try one. But after talking to my buddy, he convinced me that they're actually really easy to use, and he was totally right. I start with Valspar PVA primer, which is really good to use on raw drywall like this. If it was a previously painted wall, I could go straight to the Sherwin-Williams single coat paint and primer that I'm going to use later on.
Don't drop that. Probably don't want to drop this. Yeah, turn it.
I did some testing on some scrap drywall and then I jumped into my first wall. On this first wall, I did go a little bit too fast, but I adjusted on the rest of the walls and got really good results, and it went about 10 times faster than if I was just using a roller. Now there are a couple different types of sprayers out there. They have both airless and what's called high volume low pressure types. I chose this Wagner 4000, which is one of those HVLP, because it also comes with a smaller finishing spray gun, and I plan to use that for finishing some woodworking projects. I'm also going to use it for things like finishing a couple decks this summer. It was definitely a great investment that I'm really excited about using in the future. For the paint, I went with the Sherwin-Williams Showcase. It's a paint and primer blend with a 1-coat guarantee, and even though this paint recommends using an airless sprayer, it came out beautifully using my Wagner sprayer, which is that high volume, low pressure type. I was really impressed with the quality of this paint and how good that first coat looked. It really didn't need a second coat, but since this was my first time with the sprayer, the speed in which it went up, how much paint I had left, and the fact that it was actually a lot of fun to paint, I did go over and do a second coat using horizontal strokes to overlap those vertical strokes. And to be honest, this was the nicest looking paint job I've ever done. Well, everybody, thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned some stuff. I know I did. I'm really excited about this project. It's really opened up this basement. It looks great. The walls look great. Everything's nice and clean and open. That egress window's letting a lot of nice light down here. I'm super excited to get on to the next part of this, which is the floor and ceiling. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that project, so that you can go and improve your space in your home. Try this project. It's really not that tough, and it's really going to improve the value of your home and also the enjoyment of living down there. So we'll see you on the next project. Thanks.